The check landed on the table between the gravy boat and my untouched plate, and I knew before anyone said a word that it wasn't mine. Cream-colored paper. A bank's crisp typeface. 7 figures, if you counted the zeros twice like I did, because that's what I do. I count things twice. It slid to a stop in front of my sister Renee, and the dining room exploded into applause like she'd just been crowned something. My aunt pressed a napkin to her eyes. My father found something fascinating in the tablecloth. My mother stood at the head of the table with her wine glass raised, glowing like she'd just watched a miracle instead of signed a check. Nobody looked at me. Not once. And I was the one who'd balanced this family's books, unpaid, for 7 straight years. So I did what I always did in that house. I sat very still and ran the numbers in my head, quietly, the way you do math nobody asked you to do. 2 weeks later, my mother told me to start packing. I want you to sit with that before we go any further, because being pushed out of that house wasn't even the cruelest thing that family did to me. It wasn't close. 5 years down the road, they'd come back for something I'd built with nothing but my own 2 hands, and they'd try to take it using a signature that wasn't even mine. This is quiet ledger stories, where the daughters nobody clapped for tell you what happened after the door closed. If you've ever sat at a table like this one, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And stay close, because this story has a turn in it that you will not see coming. My mother had orchestrated the whole evening like a production, and the star of it was Renee. Carol, that's my mother's name. Though in my head she was always just the woman with the ledger book and the smile that never reached anywhere useful, stood and tapped her fork against her glass like we were toasting a wedding. This family is making an investment, she announced, and I remember thinking investment was a strange word to use for what was actually happening, which was giving your favorite daughter a small fortune with no business plan attached to it. The money was for Renee's dream, a wedding and event venue she was calling Willowbrook, the kind of place that shows up in bridal magazines with string lights and reclaimed barnwood. Renee did her practiced cry, the one that never smudges her mascara, the one she'd been perfecting since her pageant years. My aunt clapped so hard her bracelets rattled. My father nodded at his plate like it owed him an explanation. And I asked one question. Just one. What was the projected overhead for the first year? I asked it the way I'd ask any client, politely, professionally, from the woman who'd filed this family's taxes since she was barely out of her teens. The applause died on the spot. Renee's smile cracked like a dropped phone screen. My aunt looked at me like I'd trucked mud into the room. My mother set her glass down slow and deliberate and told me we could discuss the boring parts some other time. Everyone laughed, the relieved kind of laugh people do when someone else has just been put in their place instead of them. I need to be fair to myself here, because I've spent years going over this. I wasn't jealous of the money. What scared me was the math. I knew exactly what this family actually had, and I knew what happens when you pour your whole legacy into a dream that hasn't earned a single dollar yet. But my mother kept watching me over her glasses for the rest of that dinner. Not angry. Assessing. Like a woman doing inventory and deciding which item on the shelf had stopped paying for its space. 2 days later, she called me into her office, which used to be the store's back room before she moved it into the house, complete with a filing cabinet, a desk, and a notary seal sitting in its little stand like a crown she'd never taken off in 20 years. She didn't tell me to sit down. She told me the household was restructuring. Renee would need the space and the family's full attention to build her business. Then she said the sentence I still hear some nights at 2 in the morning. You're 28, Delaware. No husband, no plan, nothing that's really yours. Every dollar this family has is going where things are actually growing. I told her I'd run this family's books for 7 years without ever seeing a paycheck. She looked at me like I'd mentioned the weather. That was your room and board, she said. This family invests. It doesn't do charity. I asked where I was supposed to go. She squared a stack of papers on her desk, tapped them twice, and answered. That's the first interesting question you've asked me in years. You have 2 weeks. Then, almost gently, which somehow made it so much worse, you don't water rocks, Delaware. I nodded, because I am the kind of woman who nods, and I walked out past that filing cabinet with my whole paper life still inside it, my tax forms, my old report cards, my license copy. Everything. Standing in that hallway, I thought she was cutting me loose. She wasn't. She was filing me away. And the difference between those two things would nearly cost me everything. 5 years later, in an envelope with a bank's letterhead on it. The check bothered me for a reason simpler than pride. Math. My parents ran a small hardware supply business in a town called Millhaven. Hardware stores do not have seven figures sitting around in a drawer. That night I went down for a glass of water and saw the study light still on, the door cracked, papers fanned across the desk. I wasn't snooping. Reading what's put in front of me was, quite literally, my entire job for 7 years. On top of the pile sat a closing statement. Land sale. 40 acres off the county road, sold to a development group for just over $1 million after taxes. My grandmother Eloise's land. She'd passed almost 2 years earlier, quietly in her garden, gloves still on her hands. And I could hear her voice as clear as if she were standing behind me, because she'd said it to both of us, me and Renee. The summer I turned 24, standing in her rows of beans. When I'm gone, this land splits 2 ways. You hear me? 2 granddaughters. 2 halves. She never got around to changing the will. It all went to my mother, clean and legal, and the law has never once cared what got promised in a bean row. So there it was, printed in 10-point font on a closing statement. The $1 million wasn't a gift being handed to Renee. It was something being taken, half of a promise, quietly folded into a check and slid across a dinner table to applause. I set my glass down and went upstairs to a room that had exactly 14 days left in it, and a question opened up in me that wouldn't close again. If they could take that so easily, what else had already disappeared? You can fit almost 30 years into 11 cardboard boxes. Books took up 4 of them. Clothes took 3. And 1 box was nothing but paper. My transcripts, my community college certificate, copies of old store ledgers I'd kept for myself, because some habits are load-bearing. At the bottom of a drawer, I found a postcard my grandmother had mailed the year before she died, a picture of live oaks on the front. On the back, in her small, stubborn handwriting, 2 lines. Saw a palm tree growing straight out of a seawall today. Grow anyway. I sat on the floor of my emptying room and held that little piece of cardboard for longer than I want to admit. Renee showed up in my doorway on my last night there, leaning against the frame with a glass of wine, watching me tape boxes shut. Don't make this weird, Del, she said. It's not personal. Mom just believes in me. I asked if she'd actually read the contractor bits for her venue yet. She rolled her eyes and told me I sounded like an accountant. I am an accountant, I said. She laughed, and for one strange second we were kids again, before the pageants, before any of this. Then she drifted back down the hall toward what used to be my room and was about to become 2 rooms. One of them, briefly, mine no longer. My father walked past my door twice that night. I knew his footsteps the way you know weather rolling in. Both times, he slowed down. Both times, he kept walking. He never came in to say the thing a father is supposed to say. Instead, I found a folded $100 bill tucked under my windshield wiper the next morning. No note. Just cash and silence, which had always been his native language. My last day at the family store, I trained my own replacement, an outside bookkeeping service that would end up billing more per month than I'd cost the family in an entire year. I handed over the passwords, walked the aisles one final time, and then, because paper is how I say the things that matter, I brought my mother a single typed page. It was a formal request to be removed as a member of Millhaven Holdings, LLC, the small entity my parents had formed years earlier for tax purposes, back when I was 21 and they'd added my name as a 20% member. I'd signed wherever the tab said sign. I never received a distribution. Never cast a vote that mattered. I'd mostly forgotten the thing existed, the way you forget a spare key you handed someone during better times. But leaving town had flipped something in me. I wanted my name back. All of it. My mother took my page, slid it under her stapler without reading a word, and smiled past my shoulder at a customer. Paperwork later, Delaware. We're building something here in case you hadn't noticed. I told her I had noticed. She was already walking away. I rang up my last customer, a length of chain, a padlock, and thought the cash drawer sounded different, somehow lighter, cheaper, when you know you'll never open it again. On my way out the door, my mother called across the store, bright enough for the whole town to hear, "Drive safe, sweetheart." The performance of a loving mother, staged for whatever audience happened to be standing nearby. That page was still sitting under her stapler when the door swung shut behind me. Remember that page. Everything else in this story hinges on it. The first night of my new life, I sat on a motel bed just past the county line and made a list, because that's what I do when the world falls out from under me. I make a ledger. Assets, a little over $2,000 in checking. A car with far too many miles on it. 11 boxes. 1 postcard. Liabilities, none, which felt like its own strange kind of wealth. Skills, bookkeeping, payroll, tax filing, and I was about to discover the very specific, very marketable ability to be invisible in a room. I wrote it all out on motel stationery with a pen that kept skipping, and at the top of the page I wrote, Page 1. Rock bottom isn't dramatic. It's mostly paperwork. The next morning I spread a roadmap across the hood of my car and thought hard about where a woman with a head for numbers and zero references could actually go. Cities want degrees. Small towns want history you don't have. But the coast just wants hands that work and books that balance. 3 hours south, near the state line, there was a fishing town called Cedar Inlet. I'd been there once as a teenager, the one family trip that wasn't built around a pageant. I remembered diesel fuel and salt air and men shouting about invoices down at the marina. My grandmother had grown tomatoes in dirt the county called unbuildable. Grow anyway. I filled the tank, bought a banana at the register, and drove south with everything I owned sliding around in the back seat every time I hit the brakes. It sounded, honestly, like my whole life rearranging itself. I decided to take that as a sign. Before I could open a new account in Cedar Inlet, I had to close out the old paper trail, and that's when the floor tilted a little under me for the first time. I called the bank back home about a certificate of deposit my grandmother had opened for me the year I was born. My college fund, the one I'd been told at 19, wasn't performing, right around the time I traded university brochures for night classes at the community college. The teller on the phone was young, helpful, and had absolutely no idea what she was about to hand me. The account had been closed out in full a decade earlier. $18,000 withdrawn the spring I turned 19. Authorized by the custodian on file, my mother. I asked her to repeat the date. She did. It lined up exactly with the spring Renee turned 22 and launched her very first business, an online boutique that lasted 11 months and folded owing money to 3 different vendors. The same spring my mother had sat me down and gently explained that student debt would ruin my life. And wasn't it fortunate I had a natural head for numbers without needing a fancy diploma to prove it? I'd asked about that account back then. I want that on the record. I was told there'd been a clerical mix-up, and then I was told I was being disrespectful for pushing the issue, and in my family, that second sentence always ended the conversation. This hadn't started with a check on a dinner table 2 weeks earlier. It had started when I was a teenager, with a signature on a withdrawal slip, and the signature belonged to my mother. I thanked the teller because apparently I stay polite even while the ground is opening beneath me, and I wrote one line in my new ledger, find everything with my name still on it. Here's exactly what I did that first week, because it matters later. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I closed every account that had only my name on it and opened fresh ones locally. I found one leftover joint account from college that still had my mother's name attached. Closing it required both signatures, so I mailed her the form with a prepaid return envelope. It never came back. I drained it down to $4 and moved forward, because you protect what you can reach, and you document everything else. Then I sat in the Cedar Inlet Public Library and typed a formal letter to Millhaven Holdings, LLC, requesting to be released as a member, and sent it certified with a return receipt. 9 days later, the green card came back, signed in my mother's tidy, deliberate hand. I filed it away. I know exactly how that sounds, mailing certified letters to your own mother. But I'd grown up watching that woman keep a receipt for every vendor who'd ever crossed her twice. She taught me, without meaning to, that paper is the only witness that never changes its story after Sunday dinner. Months later, on a quick trip back to grab the last of my boxes, a teller at the old branch squinted at her screen and mentioned, almost in passing, that I was still listed as a member of the family LLC. Still listed. My letter had been received, signed for, and shelved, same as the page under the stapler. Turns out an LLC isn't like a family. You can't just be quietly written out of one because someone stopped loving you. You have to be formally released. And they never released me. Not once. Cedar Inlet did not care one bit about my last name, and that turned out to be the kindest thing a town had ever done for me. I took a night job cleaning offices, a dentist, a real estate agent, an insurance broker, 6 to midnight, paid in checks that never bounced. During the day, I answered phones for a charter fishing captain whose entire filing system, by his own admission, was the truck. I ate a lot of rice that year. I learned that the smell of someone else's coffee at 11 at night is its own particular flavor of loneliness, and that being too exhausted to feel sad isn't a cure, but it works like one in a pinch. On the community board at the laundromat, wedged between a lost cat flyer and an ad for a used boat motor, there was a notice for a QuickBooks certification course. 12 weeks. Tuesday and Thursday nights. $400. I had $460 to my name that month. I stood in front of that flyer with my laundry spinning behind me and did the math 3 separate times, as if it might change on the 3rd try. My mother's voice ran its usual commentary in the back of my skull. No plan. No spark. You don't water rocks. I tore off the tab with the phone number anyway. If I was going to bet everything on one person, it might as well be the only one who'd never once walked away from me. Sometimes courage is loud. Mine was a personal check written on top of a washing machine, my hand shaking just slightly as I signed it. The instructor took one look at my sample ledgers on the first night and asked where I'd trained. My mother's back office, I told her. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. It was, without question, the most expensive education of my entire life, and I hadn't even gotten the real bill for it yet. 14 months after I left, my cousin Priya, who has always narrated the family drama like a police scanner, forwarded me a local news story with a string of exclamation points attached. Family breaks ground on $1 million wedding venue. There was Renee in a white hard hat that had clearly never touched real dirt, gold shovel in hand. My father hovered at the edge of the frame, staring at the ground he'd just gambled the family's future on. And there was my mother, front and center, quoted like scripture. "We're a family that invests in winners," she told the reporter, smiling the exact smile she used for ribbon cuttings. Standing alone in my rented room, phone glowing in the dark, I felt the old reflex twitch to life, call. Warn them. Run the overhead numbers one more time. Be useful. Be seen being useful. I looked at that reflex like it belonged to someone else. And then I did the single healthiest calculation of my adult life. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Renee's. My father didn't own a cell phone, so silence found him automatically. My aunt I muted but never blocked, because every family needs one open channel, and hers came with the best information anyway. I turned the phone face down and stood at the window listening to a shrimp boat idle out through the channel in the dark. Peace, when it actually arrives, doesn't feel like winning. It feels like a house after all the guests have finally gone home, quiet, a little too big, and entirely finally yours. It would be 4 years before I heard my mother's voice again. When I did, she was crying like her heart had shattered, and it still wasn't an apology. I passed my certification that spring and put out my shingle the same week, if you can call a magnetic sign stuck to a car door a shingle. Coastal Ledger Company. My first client was a marina owner named Walt, 68 years old, forearms like dock pilings, the kind of man who'd once fixed a bilge pump with nothing but a spoon. He dumped a shoebox on the counter between us. The side read New Balance. Someone had scrawled taxes over it in permanent marker. Government says I owe 11 grand, he said. I say they're wrong. Fix it. It took me 9 days, buried under fuel receipts and a sandwich I'd rather not discuss, but underneath the mess was 3 years of missed fuel tax credits, unclaimed depreciation on 2 boat lifts, and a penalty that only existed because his previous accountant had filed everything late. When the dust cleared, he owed nothing, and the government owed him $9,000 back. Walt studied the amended paperwork for a long time. Then he looked at my invoice, which I'd written small because I was a little afraid of him, and said the sentence that built my entire business. This number's wrong. You're charging too little. Fix it, or I tell everyone you're cheap instead of good. He paid me double what I'd asked and told the whole marina anyway. Within a month, I had the bait shop, the ice house, and 2 charter captains, every one of them a shoebox man, allergic to paperwork, all telling each other about the quiet woman who fights the government with nothing but a calculator. I drove home that first real night with money in an account nobody but me could touch, and I sat in the driveway and laughed until it hurt. No spark. Sure, Mom. No spark at all. By the end of that first year, I had 9 clients and an office that was, technically, still the front seat of my car. Meanwhile, news from Millhaven kept arriving through Priya, whose husband did drywall work and had actually bid on Renee's venue build. Renee fired her second contractor because, in her words, he didn't understand the vision. The vision, apparently, involved imported marble in a converted barn out in the middle of nowhere. Then they flew in a lighting designer to redo what used to be the chicken coop and was now, somehow, the bridal suite. I read those texts standing in line at the fish market and felt 2 things at once, and I'll be honest about both. The first was the cold, professional dread of watching someone drive straight toward a bridge that's clearly out. I knew burn rates, and this one had a smell to it already. The second feeling was smaller, uglier, and entirely human. They chose this over me. Marble for a chicken coop, and not $1, not one glance, for the daughter who'd kept their books for free. I never asked Priya to stop sending updates. You can decide what that says about me. By December, she sent a photo of the venue's new sign, gold letters on whitewashed wood, with one line underneath. Guess what the loan payment is? I didn't guess. Some numbers you don't want living in your head. Year 2, I rented my first real office. 1 room above a bait shop, with a window unit that spat more than it cooled and a view straight out to the shrimp fleet. Best worst office in the state. The day I moved in, forwarded mail caught up with me. Buried between a fishing supply catalog and a light bill was a tax document, a Schedule K, one from Millhaven Holdings, member, me 20%, 0 distributions, naturally. I'd never seen a cent from that company, but there was my name, still riding along in their filings like a passenger nobody had bothered to let out of the car. You don't forget a passenger for 2 years running. You keep her, because she's useful somehow. I sat down and wrote a second certified letter, colder than the first, borrowing language straight out of a legal handbook at the library. Formal demand. Membership withdrawal. Confirm in writing within 30 days. 11 days later, the entire envelope came back, stamped in red, refused. Not unclaimed. Not undeliverable. Refused. My mother had looked at my own name arriving at her own front door, asking to finally be let go, and pushed it back across the counter like a bad check. I filed the refused envelope right next to the green receipt card and hated, more than anything, how ready I already was for whatever came next. That spring I landed the account that changed my whole trajectory. A woman named Sophia, who ran 4 restaurants under one very stubborn name, plus a food truck and a small catering operation, 12 sets of tangled books total. Her old accounting firm had been billing her blind and never returning calls. She interviewed me at a back table with a toddler balanced on her hip and asked why she should trust someone working out of a room above a bait shop. Because I answer my phone, I told her. And because I'll find money your last accountant was too bored to look for. I found it in 6 weeks, a misclassified equipment lease and 2 years of tip credit errors worth more than my entire fee for the year. Sophia didn't say thank you. She did something better. She called 3 friends. Walt had already taught me the lesson that carried me from there. Charge like you plan to still be here in 10 years. My first real quote made my own throat tighten. Sophia didn't blink. Nobody ever blinks, it turns out. The only person who'd ever decided I was worth nothing got me for free for 7 straight years. I've stopped believing that's a coincidence. By early summer I had a waiting list, and I did something radical for a woman raised in my family. I started turning down work politely, with referrals like a business that actually respects its own hours. The night I turned away my first prospective client, Priya sent a screenshot from Renee's public page. Sunset string lights. Renee glowing in white linen, arms spread wide beneath the reclaimed beams. Caption: fully booked for the season. Priya's one-line commentary underneath is still the sharpest piece of financial analysis I've ever read. Booked ain't the same as paid. That summer, a glossy regional magazine ran a 6-page feature, The Willowbrook Miracle. How one family bet everything on a dream. I read it standing at my post office box. The photography was genuinely stunning. Whatever else you want to say about Renee, she can style a room. There was my mother in a straw hat, laughing in soft focus, captioned as Matriarch and Chief Believer. The article said bookings were strong. What the article didn't include, not one single figure. And I read anything financial the way other people read horoscopes. I notice exactly what's missing. 2 days later, Priya supplied the missing numbers herself, in her own particular format, a photo of her husband at their kitchen table, deadpan, holding an unpaid invoice like a mugshot. Drywall balance, 90 days past due. Also, the fall fundraiser got postponed for weather. It hasn't rained here in 3 weeks. I put my phone face down and looked out at the boats, doing the quiet math nobody had asked me for, because apparently that is simply the shape of my soul. Strong bookings. Unpaid contractors. A postponed fundraiser for a business that had opened with $1 million in the bank and shouldn't have needed one at all. Something was already eating itself alive under all that string lighting. I'd like to tell you I felt sorry. Mostly, what I felt was the specific vertigo of watching my own childhood repeat itself at a much larger scale, appearances paid for in full, the people actually doing the work put on payment plans. That had always been how my family operated. The only thing that changed was the size of the invoice, and whose porch it would eventually land on. That October, a group text landed on my phone. My mother's number, blasted out to what looked like 200 contacts. You're invited to an evening at Willowbrook, celebrating our first incredible year. $500 per plate. Family discount available. I hadn't heard her voice in 3 years, and yet there I was, sandwiched between the pharmacy and the pastor on her marketing list. I read it 4 times. The audacity had layers, like a wedding cake. She'd personally pushed my letter back across a counter. She'd told the whole town I was ungrateful. And she'd kept me on the invite list, because a contact is an asset, and my mother has never once deleted an asset in her life. I typed and deleted a dozen responses, each one its own small courtroom. Then I sent the only one with no blood in it at all, no. Priya called within the hour, cackling, until her voice dropped into its serious register. You know what that fundraiser is actually for, right? Word is there's already a second loan. A big one. And apparently your mother had to promise the bank quite a bit to get it. I didn't know it yet, but one of the things she'd promised was me. That September a hurricane came ashore 40 miles east of us, close enough on the Gulf to still put 4 inches of bay water through my office floor. I got the warning at noon and did the only triage that actually mattered, client records first. I hauled totes down 2 flights of stairs for 3 straight hours and drove everything to storage on high ground while the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. My own furniture I left to the flood. Desks are replaceable. A shrimper's 4 years of fuel logs are not. Afterward, the town did what small coastal towns always do. Chainsaws by sunrise, casseroles by noon. I found my own way to help, because paperwork after a disaster is still paperwork, and paperwork has always been my language. I set up a folding table outside the church with a hand-lettered sign, free help with storm claims. For 2 weeks I filled out FEMA forms and insurance paperwork for shrimpers, motel owners, and a one-armed roofer who hugged me so hard my back cracked. I didn't plan any of it as marketing. I need you to believe that, because what happened afterward embarrassed me for a solid year. When the water finally receded, 15 new clients climbed my stairs, some of them still smelling faintly of bleach, every one of them saying some version of the same thing. You showed up when it was free, so now I trust you when it costs. My mother had raised me to believe love was an investment expecting a guaranteed return. This town taught me the opposite. Give first, open-handed, and somehow impossibly, the books still balance in the end. The storm had also nearly finished off one particular house at the end of a sandy lane, up on the dune line, shoulders squared against the Gulf. Gray cedar shake, built decades earlier by a retired boat captain who'd framed it, apparently, like he framed fishing holes. I'd walked past that house every evening for 2 years. It was the one I always nodded to. The storm tore off its roof deck, blew out the seaward windows, drowned the wiring, and the out-of-state family who owned it finally gave up on it entirely. It went up for county auction that winter. Cash only. No contingencies. I found the listing on a Tuesday night and sat with my laptop glowing in the dark like a small fire. Here's what I actually had. $73,000, saved a little at a time, 3 years of rice dinners and canceled vacations. Here's what a flipper would see looking at that lot. A teardown with a decent view. Here's what I saw. Sound original framing. A survey confirming the dune had held through the storm. And math. Done at midnight on the back of a deposit slip. I called Walt at 7 the next morning because he'd know the bones of the place. He walked it with me that weekend. Kicked at a piling like he was buying livestock, pried open the crawl space, and stood quiet under the floor joists for a long moment. Captain Built, he finally said. Nobody frames like this anymore. That's exactly why it survived. By the house, Delaware. I mentioned that a duplex in town was probably the smarter move. He looked at me the way you look at someone who's dialed a wrong number. You've been nodding at this house for 2 years. I've watched you do it. Go get your dirt. The auction happened on the courthouse steps on a cold Thursday morning, which sounds romantic and is, in reality, just cold. 11 of us stood there breathing steam while a clerk read legal descriptions like scripture. When the parcel came up, the crowd went quiet. It came down to me and one other bidder, a flipper in a golf vest who bid with his chin like the money wasn't really his. 48. 52. 55. He tipped his chin toward 59 with the bored confidence of someone else's money behind him, and I heard my own voice come out flat and absolutely final, the voice of a woman who has counted exactly what she has and knows the number cold. 61.5. He checked his phone. Whatever spreadsheet lived in there said no. The gavel came down, an actual gavel, because this town has never once upgraded anything, and a broken house on a dune belonged to a woman who'd arrived 3 years earlier with 11 boxes and a pen that skipped. My hands were shaking so hard signing the paperwork that the clerk kindly pretended not to notice. That afternoon I drove out with the old brass key the county had mailed me. It didn't turn. 60 years of salt had rusted the lock solid, and the key just spun my hope in a circle and handed it back empty. So I dragged a crate under the east window, knocked a sheet of plywood loose, and climbed in through the window of my own house. It was still the easiest door my family had ever given me. I sat down right there on the gritty floor, surrounded by the smell of salt and old wood, sunset pouring in stripes through the empty window frames, and held that useless brass key until it went warm in my palm. Remember this house. Remember this key. Everything my family does for the rest of the story, they do because of what this house eventually became. The renovation ran on weekends and pure stubbornness. I learned to sister floor joists from an internet video and a retired framer named Hollis, who worked for fish sandwiches. The wiring I paid a licensed electrician to do properly, because water and fire are exactly where pride goes to die. Month by month the house came back to life. New roof, new windows, a porch you could actually trust your weight to. And while it did, the firm outgrew what one woman in a room above a bait shop could manage alone, so I hired a 19-year-old named Ren straight out of community college, a girl who talked to spreadsheets far more easily than to people, and who flinched every time I praised her work, which told me plenty about the house she'd grown up in before she ever said a word about it. Buying a house at county auction, it turns out, comes with its own homework. My closing attorney's office ran the standard title search on me as the buyer, liens, judgments, entities on record. I signed the authorization without thinking twice. My credit was frozen and clean. My accounts were clean. 5 years of careful, documented living. On paper, I was the most boring woman in the entire state and proud of it. The title clerk said the report would take about 2 weeks. It took 9 days, and then she called my office at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and her voice had that carefully casual tone people use exactly when things are not casual at all. "Quick question," she said. "Are you aware you're listed as an active member of an LLC out of state?" I told her yes, unfortunately, and started my usual explanation about the family company that refused to release me. She interrupted, politely, with the sentence that rearranged my entire year. "The membership isn't the flag, ma'am. The activity is. There are recent UCC financing statements filed against that company. For anyone who's never had the pleasure, UCC filing is the public fingerprint a lender leaves behind when a business pledges its assets as collateral for a loan. My name was attached to a 20% slice of a company that was, right now, actively pledging itself to a bank. And I hadn't signed, seen, or heard a single word about any of it. She read me the filing dates. The earliest lined up almost exactly with the groundbreaking ceremony. The most recent was only months old. Whatever Willowbrook was costing, Millhaven Holdings was helping pay for it, and Millhaven Holdings was still wearing my name. I got very calm, which the people who know me best have learned is actually my loudest possible alarm. I thanked her, hung up, and stood at my office window watching a pelican fail spectacularly at landing on a piling. I thought about my mother at that post office counter, pushing my name back across like a return check. Twice I'd asked to be released. Twice ignored. I'd always assumed it was spite, or laziness, or the family's general allergy to admitting fault. Standing at that window, I finally ran the colder version of the equation. You don't keep a name on a company out of spite. Spite is free, and my mother has never once held on to a free asset in her life. You keep a name on a company because that name is worth something to somebody. I just couldn't see who yet. I closed on my broken, beautiful house 8 days later, and I hired a lawyer before I hired a plumber. Patricia Vance practices out of a converted house downtown, gravel driveway, a paralegal named Odette who runs the place like a small, efficient warship. Patricia is somewhere past 60, reads operating agreements the way other people read novels for pleasure, and bills like she rarely has to apologize for it. I brought her my whole folder, the green receipt signed by my mother, the envelope stamped refused, the tax documents, the title company's notes on the UCC filings. She read through all of it for 20 minutes without saying a single word while I studied her diplomas and a stuffed redfish mounted on the wall. Then she looked up. The operating agreement is your real problem. Membership withdrawal requires approval from 51% of the ownership interest. Your parents hold 80%. You hold 20 and a mailbox. I asked what my options actually were. Today, we send a third demand on my letterhead, using statutory language that makes it very expensive for them to keep ignoring. We put them on formal notice that you disclaim any participation and any debts. And then, we wait for them to make a mistake. People who ignore 2 letters generally make a third one. She slid a legal pad across the desk and had me write out the entire history, every date, every request, every refusal, start to finish. When I finished writing, she read it over and tapped one finger against the page. You kept the receipt from years ago. Why? I told her the truth. I don't know how to not keep things. My entire life, keeping perfect records was how I proved to people determined not to see me that I actually existed. Patricia looked at me over her glasses with something I couldn't quite name yet. Paper doesn't lie, she said. People do. Keep every single receipt. One day the paper gets to talk. It's the only witness your family can't charm. Her third letter went out certified on a Friday. The signature card came back in her mother's same tidy hand. And then, 4 months, absolute silence. The call came at 1 in the morning from a number I didn't recognize, and I answered, because coastal accountants learn to answer their phones during storm season no matter the hour. It was Renee. 4 years of complete silence, and she opened with, "Did I wake you?" Honestly, I don't even care. She was drunk in that careful, deliberate way, every word set down like fine stemware. Behind her I could hear a television and the family's old wind chimes, so she was home, on the porch where we used to shell peas together as kids. She talked for 11 straight minutes, and I mostly listened, because you learn far more from a monologue than you ever do from an interview. She described running a business as drowning in front of an audience that had paid for the privilege of watching. She said everyone who'd once clapped for her now called with nothing but questions in their voice. Then she found the old knife she'd always known exactly where to keep. You know what your problem always was, Del? Nobody ever expected a single thing from you. You got to just be nothing. Lucky you. I watched the ceiling fan turn overhead and understood, maybe for the very first time, that the check on that dinner table had been its own kind of sentence for her too. Just a different flavor of the same punishment. This one with an audience attached. Her voice went small and flat, and she finally said the thing I'd always known was living under everything else. It was supposed to be me. It was always supposed to be me. I asked, gently, what exactly was supposed to be her. The question seemed to sober her half a degree, because she went quiet. When she spoke again, the smallness had vanished, replaced by something rehearsed. Mom says when it all comes right, you'll owe us. Either way you owe. Then she stopped, not trailed off, stopped, the way a call stops when a hand closes over the receiver. The line went dead. I lay awake until the gulls started up outside. Owe them what, exactly? Willowbrook didn't last 3 years. It died the way most businesses die, slowly, and then all at once on a single ordinary morning. Priya sent the photo before 8 a.m. The gates chained shut, zip-tied at the scrollwork. A county notice stapled to the post in bold red print. Delinquent taxes, pending tax sale. Behind it all, you could still make out the white porch and the string lights, sagging now like the party had aged 40 years overnight. Renee moved back into our parents' house that same week, into what used to be my old room, Priya reported, since her actual room had become storage for unsold branded candles nobody wanted. Here's the part that matters most, the hinge this entire story swings on. Back home, the story of the collapse got written that same month, and I wasn't there to correct a single line of it. The story went, poor Renee, she dreamed so big, and then the storms hit and the economy turned, and meanwhile her sister, sitting comfortably on her own money down south, wouldn't lift a single finger to help family. My mother never said it in the first person. She simply tilted her head and let the town fill in the rest. She has always been fluent in implication. Within a month, one of my clients with relatives back home quietly closed her account, no reason given. And that same week, a certified bank envelope found its way to my office, waiting between a supply catalog and a thank you card from the roofer I'd helped after the storm. First National, out of Millhaven. Certified, which I noticed with a small, bitter laugh. They'd finally learned my language. Inside, one page, and the coldest header in the English language. Notice to guarantor, Millhaven Holdings, LLC. Commercial note, original principal $380,000. Status, 90 days delinquent. My own name in the salutation, like a hook set deep in a lip. Dear Ms., as guarantor of the above referenced obligation, you are hereby notified. I read it standing up, then sitting down. Then I laid it flat on the desk and set my hands flat beside it, because they wanted to shake and I don't allow that during business hours. $380,000. More than my house and the firm's best year combined. Payable, apparently, by me, on a loan I had never once seen, for a company I had begged, in writing 3 separate times on certified paper, to release me from. Ren found me 20 minutes later, still frozen at my desk, and asked if I was okay in the careful voice of a girl who already knows exactly what a house sounds like right before something in it breaks. I told her to pull Patricia's number, because underneath the roaring in my ears, the professional part of my brain, the part my mother had built, God help us both, had already isolated the one word doing all the damage. Guarantor. Members of an LLC aren't automatically responsible for its debts. That's the entire point of the letters LLC. A personal guarantee is different. It's individual. It requires an actual signature. My signature, which meant somewhere in a file drawer at that bank, 200 miles north, there was a document with my name signed on it. And I had never signed anything of the kind. Patricia read the notice twice and went very, very still. The particular stillness good lawyers get, like a heron over water. We demand the full loan file today, she said. The note, the guarantee, every signature page. Everything. Her letter went out that same afternoon. The bank responded the way small-town banks always respond when a name in their own file starts asking uncomfortable questions, slowly, politely, and with absolutely no documents attached. A week of processing. Another week of counsel reviewing. Patricia said the stall itself was information. Banks move fast when their file is actually clean. And right in the middle of that waiting, on an ordinary Tuesday evening while I stood in my half-renovated kitchen eating crackers over the sink, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered it thinking it was finally the bank. It was my mother. 4 years of silence, and her voice arrived already crying. Not the polished, pageant-trained tears Renee had learned from her, but something wetter, older, and genuinely convincing. Sweetheart, she said. I know it's been so long. I know things were said. Things were said. The passive voice of every unswept kitchen in the country. She didn't mention the bank. Didn't mention the loan, or the notice with my name buried in its teeth. She talked about my father not getting any younger. She talked about how much Renee was going through. And then she laid the honey down right over the wound, exactly the way only the person who cut you knows how to do it. We hear about you down there, you know. Your little firm. That house on the water. We're so proud of what you've built, sweetheart. Proud. 29 years, and there it finally was, right on schedule, exactly when my signature became worth more to her than my absence. I told her I'd think about it. And God forgive whatever part of me was still 29 years old and living somewhere in my chest, because some small piece of me actually glowed. I went. Patricia advised against it strongly, since the loan file was still an open question and walking into that kitchen was walking straight into weather. I went anyway, and I'm not going to dress it up for you. 5 years of building an entirely new life, and one proud of you had me checking my rearview mirror at every single red light the whole 3 hours north. The old house on Sycamore had shrunk the way childhood houses do. New gutters, though. I noticed maintenance the way other women notice a fresh haircut. Inside it smelled like Sunday roast and the lemon polish my mother only ever brought out for company. My old bedroom door stood open just enough that I could see Renee's boxes stacked to the ceiling. Dinner was, and I say this with the clinical precision of an accountant, flawless. My mother had made everything I loved at 9 years old, pulled from some archive I didn't even know she still kept. My father hugged me at the door a beat too long, then produced a shoebox from the sideboard full of newspaper clippings, mentions of Coastal Ledger in the business section, the little profile the county paper ran after the storm, my Chamber of Commerce photo, carefully cut out and dated in pencil. My father doesn't talk. He archives. It's the only language he's ever been fluent in. I sat there holding proof that I'd been watched, followed, tracked through all those silent years, and I had to excuse myself to the same bathroom I'd cried in at 17 and press a cold washcloth to my face like a woman trying to defuse herself. Warmth was the one weapon I had never once built a defense against. They'd simply never used it before. Through the door I could hear the good china coming out and my mother's laugh running the length of the table. And when I came back, sitting on the kitchen counter, was a folder. Green. Brand new. Squared at the corners, with the bank's logo printed neatly on the tab. They'd waited until the pie. My mother refilled my coffee, sat up straighter than usual, and folded her hands like she was chairing a meeting. And if you'd ever watched her chair one, which for 7 unpaid years I had, you'd have recognized every gesture instantly. "We want to talk about the future," she said. Renee lit up like stage lights had just found her mark. The pitch had slides, actual printed pages tucked into plastic sleeves. Willowbrook. Chapter 2. Rebrand. Corporate retreats. Intimate luxury events. Renee's vision, and my name in a serif font underneath the words Financial Director. "You're the missing piece," Renee said. "You were always the missing piece." My mother took my hand across the table, and hers was trembling. I still don't know to this day which parts of that evening were performance, and which were the genuine grip of a drowning woman. "We were wrong about you," she said, placing each word like fine china. "You're the one with the head on her shoulders. This is your chance to finally be part of this family, Delaware." And there it was, the exact sentence I had been saving a seat for since I was a child. I want to be honest about the next 30 seconds, because I promised myself I'd tell this whole story true. I saw it, all of it, whole, the way you see a landscape from an airplane window. Sunday dinners. My father's clippings taped to a refrigerator. A place inside the word "we" with my name already written on it. They were selling it to me, and for 30 full seconds, I was actually pricing it. Then my mother slid that green folder across the table. The exact same gesture, the exact same tablecloth, 5 years apart, and named the number. "The refinance needs $500,000. The bank just needs your signature, sweetheart. You're the only one of us they trust anymore. The bank just needs your signature." Somewhere underneath the pie and the trembling hands, a vault door swung shut inside me, calm and final. I didn't open the folder. I squared it neatly to the table edge, out of pure habit, and said, "No." Quietly, the way you say things that are actually true. "I won't be signing anything. Not this and not anything else with that company's name on it." For one long second, the whole kitchen held its breath, and I watched something happen in my mother's face that I had never seen in real time. The warmth drained out of it like water finding a crack, and what stood behind it had clearly been doing math all evening long. "After everything this family gave you," she said, her voice suddenly stripped of every tremor, "you'd sit at my table and refuse." "You gave me 2 weeks and a deadline for my boxes," I said. Renee shoved her chair back hard enough to scrape the floor and left the room. A door slammed somewhere upstairs and set the wind chimes shaking. My mother gathered the plates with terrible composure. My father studied the floor like his own verdict was written there. I picked up my keys and thanked her for dinner, because I was raised right, which has always been the exact joke at the center of this entire story. At the door I stopped. I asked the one question Patricia had told me to save, but I'm my mother's daughter after all, and I wanted to watch the answer land. Mom. The delinquency notice from the bank. Why did it come to me? She stood in the yellow hallway light and didn't blink once. I'm sure I don't know. Delegate banks make mistakes. My mother has never once in her entire life believed banks make mistakes. It's the one faith we've always shared. I was already in the car when the porch light clicked on. My father came outside carrying trash that plainly did not need carrying, a half-full bag, an obvious prop at 65 years old, and it was the best cover story available to him in his own driveway. He set the bag by the can, then came around to my window and stood there in his cardigan, worrying something square between his hands. I rolled the window down. He looked at me for a long moment, and in the porch light his eyes were an old man's eyes, and I realized, all at once, that my father had aged on the exact same schedule as everything else that had fallen apart around him, and had said nothing about any of it. Your grandmother liked you best, he said. Just that. The first words he'd spoken all evening. Then he pushed the folded square through the window. Pages creased soft at the edges, like they'd been folded and unfolded many, many times inside a shirt pocket. Thought you should have this, he said. Then he straightened, picked his prop trash bag back up, and shuffled back into a house he could no longer really afford. The porch light clicked off before I could even say his name. I drove 11 miles to a motel on the state road with those pages sitting on the passenger seat, and I want you to understand, I did not unfold them at a single red light. I did not unfold them in the parking lot. 5 years of discipline is good for exactly that much restraint. I got a room. I sat at one of those bolted-down motel desks under a light the color of weak tea. I photographed the folded square first, untouched, time-stamped, because chain of custody has become its own kind of love language for me by now. Then I opened my father's laundry. 40 minutes later I called Patricia at home, close to 11 at night. She picked up on the second ring like she'd been expecting the call for months. It was the guarantee. A photocopy of a commercial guarantee agreement, First National Bank, securing a consolidated note for Millhaven Holdings, LLC. $380,000. Guarantor me. And on the final page, above my typed name, a signature. My signature. Or, more precisely, something wearing my signature's clothes. The first letter correct. The last correct. The little tail on the final letter, almost right, the way a mannequin is almost a person. It was dated the previous October. I pulled up my work calendar with cold fingers, because that's what I do. I check even when checking feels like a formality. On that exact date, I'd been at my restaurant client Sophia's flagship location until well past 10 at night, closing out quarterly books with 2 of her managers, 200 miles from home. I have the billing records to prove it. Sophia has security cameras. And below the forged signature, stamped and inked and completely serene, sat the thing that took my breath away far more than the forgery itself. A notary seal. State registered. Signature witnessed and sworn before a commissioned notary. In person, the whole formal process. Someone hadn't just signed my name. Someone had stood in front of a state officer and sworn, under oath, that I had been physically present. And that officer had agreed. That was the moment the entire dinner reassembled itself in my head, every course finally in its true order. The tears on the phone. The archive of clippings. Proud of you, sweetheart. The folder, squared on the counter before I'd ever said yes to Sunday. They hadn't invited me home to actually come home. The guarantee was already smoking, already delinquent, the bank already circling. They'd brought me north to refinance a forgery, to finally get my real signature laid down over the fake one, like clean flooring poured right over rot. You're just wasting space here. 5 years later, I finally had the full translation. The space they'd called wasted was never in that house. It had been sitting on a signature line the entire time, and they'd quietly rented it out. Back home, Patricia and I laid the whole thing out across her conference table like pieces of a quilt. The certified receipt signed by my mother, years old. The envelope stamped refused. Patricia's own ignored letter. 3 separate written demands for release. And then, appearing out of nowhere, a guarantee wearing my name, matched against my own work calendar and a restaurant's security footage for that exact night. Patricia studied it all and said we had 2 roads. Road 1 is civil. We deny the guarantee, litigate against the bank's file. Takes a year, maybe 2, costs you 6 figures to maybe win. Then she tapped the photocopy. Road 2. This stops being a paperwork problem. This is forgery, and that seal makes it so much worse. We put your denial into a sworn affidavit and send it to the bank with everything you just showed me. Banks don't defend forged paper. They cut it loose fast. She let that sit, then added the part that mattered most. Understand what's inside Road 2, Delaware. An affidavit like this doesn't stay quiet in a drawer. It goes to their fraud unit, to state regulators. It becomes a referral. It reaches people with badges. I asked her to translate that into plain English. Somebody in your family has committed a felony. Possibly 2. You'd be signing that affidavit. You wouldn't just be venting at a family dinner anymore. You'd be handing them to the state. We sat with that for a long moment. Then I said the thing I'd been carrying since the motel, the thing I could only say out loud in that room, in front of that mounted redfish. Patricia, I could just pay it. The house, the reserves. I could cover all of it, and this just stops. She didn't flinch. Yes, she said. You could buy them off. The question is what exactly you'd be buying. While I was still deciding, they answered the question for me. A process server climbed my office stairs on a Thursday morning, confirmed my name with an apologetic nod, and handed me a lawsuit. Plaintiffs, my mother, my father, my sister. Defendant, me. The theory sprawled across 18 pages, but here's its actual spine, that my professional skills had been developed within the family, that my unpaid years constituted a constructive partnership I'd abandoned, and that my firm and my house were, therefore, fruits of that partnership. They wanted $450,000, or, the complaint helpfully suggested, equivalent participation in my ongoing business. Patricia called it exactly what it was, a nuisance suit engineered to bleed me dry, with maybe a 4% chance of surviving the year and a 100% chance of costing me every dollar and every night's sleep until it finally died. But it was page 11 that changed the temperature of my blood entirely. Their attorney had attached, as an exhibit demonstrating good faith reconciliation efforts, his own engagement letter, dated 3 full weeks before that Sunday dinner. Before the tearful phone call. Before the yeast rolls and the archived clippings, and this is your chance to finally be part of this family. They'd hired a lawyer to sue me, and then set the table anyway. The dinner had been discovery. The pie had been a deposition. Here's the thing about growing up inside a family story. Leaving the house doesn't actually get you out of the story. Silence just hands them the pen to write your remaining chapters. For 5 years I'd let them narrate. Poor Renee. Cold, ungrateful Delaware. And I told myself that dignity meant never answering back. That Thursday, dignity changed jobs. I told Patricia to file our response and to countersue, not for money, but for daylight. A declaration that no partnership had ever existed, and that the guarantee was void from the start. Then I did the thing that, in a family like mine, counts as the real crossing of a line. I called Priya and told her absolutely everything on the record. No, keep this between us. The college fund. The refused letters. The forged guarantee with its state seal. The lawsuit dressed up as a family reunion. In my family, you can apparently commit any number of sins except one. Telling the truth out loud is treason. Word moved through the county like weather. My aunt called sobbing and stayed on the line for an hour straight. Distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade sent me Bible verses that could have cut either direction. 2 more clients back home quietly closed their accounts. I felt each one like a pulled tooth. Walt heard the whole thing from Doc Gossip, climbed my stairs, and set a fist on my counter. Anybody asks me, I tell them you're the only one in that family worth trusting with a receipt. Then my mother's voicemail arrived on the one line I'd never blocked. No tears this time. Tears cost extra, apparently. Just her measured, unhurried voice delivering a eulogy she'd clearly written for me years earlier. "I hear you've been telling stories, Delaware. We gave that money where it could actually grow. You don't water rocks. Don't you dare punish this family for gardening." I saved that voicemail in 3 separate places. Evidence, yes. But also the kind of stone you keep in your pocket so you never forget the road that got you here. Litigation, it turns out, is a tax on absolutely everything. Money, sleep, attention, joy. By midsummer, my legal bills had crossed $38,000. I'd lost a client to sheer awkwardness and started doing payroll at 5 in the morning, because dawn was the only hour the lawsuit didn't own yet. Ren carried the office through it, steady as a keel at only 20 years old, leaving fresh coffee outside my door without ever knocking. The highest form of love a quiet person knows how to offer. Discovery ground along slowly. Their side produced almost nothing but recollections and characterizations, a decade of promises with no paper trail. Our side produced paper, my entire beautiful, boring archive, every receipt its own small soldier standing at attention. Then one evening, after her paralegal had gone home, Patricia called me back into her office. She had the photocopied guarantees spread under her desk lamp and a jeweler's loop out of her drawer, of all things, like a stamp collector. "Look at the seal," she said. I looked. An inked circle. State registration. The notary's name ringing the edge, along with a commission number. Patricia's finger came down beside it, very still. Every notary has a unique commission number, and every commission is public record. Name, county, dates of appointment. She wrote the number from the seal on a legal pad, tore off the sheet, and slid it across to me. "Run it tonight." And Dell, she took off her glasses, which in Patricia is a genuine warning sign. "When you see whose name comes back, call me before you call anyone else. Before your cousin. Before God." Are we clear? The state's notary database is free, public, and loads painfully slowly. I sat in my truck outside her office that night, typing the number in with the window down and the marsh crickets going, already half certain what I'd find. I typed it anyway. I'm the woman who checks. Notary public. My mother's name. 25 years commission. Renewed like clockwork. In good standing. My mother's seal, stamped over my forged name, swearing to the state that I had stood in front of her and signed. The subpoenaed loan file arrived from the bank 2 weeks later and finished the math. Their internal notes had been pushing for a personal guarantor since the venue's 2nd year. Bloodless bank language, family member with liquidity identified. When the note was consolidated that October, the guarantee appeared, sworn and sealed, and the bank's pressure evaporated overnight. Her own notary logbook, surrendered under subpoena because a missing logbook is its own kind of confession, showed the entry in her own confident handwriting. Date. Instrument. Signer me. Personally known to me. Patricia's handwriting examiner delivered the final brick. The signature itself hadn't been my mother's hand at all. The pen pressure, the letter shapes, the small telltale hesitations, they matched Renee's handwriting, cross-referenced against a decade of birthday cards and old pageant paperwork. Renee had written my name. My mother had stamped it true. One daughter's hand, the other daughter's name, and their mother's seal binding the two together, the entire family's operating philosophy compressed onto a single signature line. I sat in Patricia's office holding the photocopied log page, and what I felt was quieter and worse than tears. It was recognition. There had been no desperate midnight panic here. A logbook entry is deliberate. Done at a desk, in good light, with a seal you've carried proudly for 25 years. My mother had looked at both her daughters and simply done what she had always done, spent the one she didn't believe in to fund the one she did. The court ordered mediation for early October, standard practice for family-on-family cases, a judge's polite way of saying, "Please don't make me watch this in open court." The night before, unable to sit still in my finished house, I walked the beach with my shoes in my hand and did what I always do at the edge of things. Inventory. Column 1. Pay the full $380,000. Remortgage the house, drain the reserves, but the lawsuit dies. The bank is satisfied, and the door back home swings open again. Sunday dinners. My father's clippings. My mother saying proud loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Everything I'd been window shopping my whole life, suddenly affordable. That was the poison beauty of it. Column 2, the affidavit. My name cleared, the forgery named out loud for what it was, and my mother and sister handed to the exact system I'd been raised to fear disappointing. No dinner table on earth would ever seat me again after that. My aunt's number might survive it. Might. I stopped at the tittle line and pulled out the postcard, which I'd moved from my glove box to my jacket pocket that very morning. Saw a palm tree growing straight out of a seawall. Grow anyway. Standing there, I finally audited the one account I'd been keeping off my own books for 5 years straight. The house with its proud, straight roofline behind me. The firm. The folder of receipts. Who exactly had I been keeping those records for? Because some part of me, I could see her clearly now in the dark, had been quietly building an exhibit this whole time. Proof for a courtroom that would eventually convene in my mother's kitchen, presided over by a judge who'd already ruled against me at birth. Tomorrow, that judge was finally going to hand down a verdict. I walked home slowly and let the question walk beside me the whole way. The mediation was held halfway between our two towns, in a law office with a conference room kept at the temperature of a meat locker and artwork chosen, specifically to offend absolutely no one. They arrived 4 minutes late, which in my mother's grammar is a complete sentence, subject and verb both included. Renee wore her good Navy interview dress, hair in a humble bun, a legal pad she would never once write on. My mother wore church clothes and carried, I am not making this up, a Tupperware container of lemon bars, which she set squarely in the middle of the table like a flag planted on a beach. Feeding people has always been her opening argument. The mediator was a retired judge, patient with the particular fatigue of a man who'd heard 400 families explain themselves. Their attorney went first, and I'll grant him this much. He told a beautiful story. A devoted family. A modest fortune. A daughter who'd taken her family's training south and prospered while the rest of them drowned. He used the word abandoned twice and family values until it stopped meaning anything at all. My mother dabbed at her eyes on cue. Renee stared at her blank legal pad, playing a role I recognized from every pageant green room of my childhood, composed grief, third runner-up. I sat beside Patricia in the cold, watching my family perform the story of me, and felt something I genuinely had not expected to feel on the far side of all that paperwork. Calm. The very specific calm of a woman who has finally stopped auditioning for this particular jury. Their opening offer arrived mid-morning, dressed up as generosity. They'd dismiss the lawsuit entirely, walk away from every claim, their attorney said, palms open like a man releasing a dove, in exchange for a family restructuring of the outstanding debt. Translated, that meant I'd quietly assume the full $380,000 note. The guarantee would never be examined. Mutual confidentiality, mutual releases, and everyone remains family. He genuinely said that. Everyone remains family. Patricia said we'd like to respond, in the exact tone you'd use offering someone more coffee, and opened our folder, dealing the exhibits out slow and clean. The certified receipt. The refused envelope. The engagement letter dated 3 weeks before that reconciliation dinner. My work calendar. Sophia's security records. The handwriting examiner's report. And finally, alone, the notary log page and its matching commission record, which she set down without a single word of argument. Some exhibits you narrate, and some you simply let sit on the table and tick like a clock. The mediator read everything. The room changed pressure. Their attorney reached for the log page, read it, and went carefully blank, the expression of a man recalculating his own exposure in real time. Renee stopped performing grief and started actually breathing, and my mother watched the mediator's face with the same alert stillness I remembered from 30 years of watching her count a registered drawer that wasn't adding up. The judge asked to caucus with each side separately. My mother spoke for the first time all morning. First, she said, I want 10 minutes alone with my daughter. They gave us a small side room with a humming air vent and a watercolor of a lighthouse on the wall. 10 minutes. Both attorneys pacing the hallway like expectant fathers. My mother sat across from me, and for the first time since I was a small child, I watched her set the performance down piece by piece, the way you take off earrings after church. What sat there underneath was the woman from the back office. The one with the stapler. The seal she'd carried for 25 years. You were never stupid, she said. So I'll say this plainly. That paper out there ruins us. Your sister forged it. I sealed it. You know that. I know it. And that judge knows it by now, too. She folded her hands. So here's what I'm offering, and I will only offer it once. Pay the note quietly. Sign the settlement. Let the guarantee die in a drawer, and it's finished. No charges. No stories. No shame on anyone's name. And you come home. I mean it fully. Sunday dinners, holidays. Your father has maybe 5 good years left. You'd have every one of them. She leaned in, and her voice did something I'd waited my entire life to hear, and it was terrible to finally hear it now. It warmed. I will stand up in front of this whole town and say we were wrong about you. I'll put your name back where it belongs, sweetheart. The vent hummed. And because silence has always been the one tool that works on me, she filled it with the single true gift she gave me that whole day. You think I'm a monster? My own father stood in our store when I was 23 and handed the keys to your Uncle Ray, because Ray had the smile. I stood on the sidewalk with my nose pressed against my own family's glass. I swore I'd never split what I had into halves that both lose. I backed the one who shined, because nobody ever backed me. That's not cruelty, Delaware. That's just how it works. I did what was already done to me. The strange thing, the thing I didn't expect after 5 years of rehearsing this exact room in my head, is that I believed her. All of it. The sidewalk. The glass. The girl of 23 with her nose against her own name. I believed every word. And for one moment I saw the whole machine laid out end to end. Her father's spending her. Her spending me. The same coin passed hand to hand until somebody either spends their own child, too, or finally drops the coin on the floor and refuses to pick it back up. She was offering me everything I had ever wanted, in that little humming room. That's what you need to understand. This wasn't only a trick. The dinners would have been real. The clippings would have gone up on the refrigerator. The name would genuinely have gone back where it belonged. All of it mine. Retail price $380,000, plus my permanent silence, plus one working lie sealed forever inside a logbook. And sitting in that cold humming room, I finally saw the flaw in the merchandise. The crack I'd been squinting past my whole life. If it can be bought, it was never actually the thing I'd been starving for. A verdict you can purchase tells you nothing at all about your worth. That's the entire reason you can't buy one anywhere honest. I had spent 5 years building a life I told myself was entirely for me, and mostly it was. But there had always been one shelf inside it, kept dusted, waiting for her inspection. One exhibit, waiting patiently on a judge. I looked at that judge now, one last time, and asked the only question left on my docket. If Willowbrook had actually worked, if the million had grown the way you wanted, would you have ever once called me? The vent hummed on. My mother looked at me, and to her credit, her final terrible credit, she did not perform. She looked at me the way she looked at inventory, and she chose accuracy over comfort. She said absolutely nothing at all. It was the single most honest conversation we ever had. Something in my chest that had been holding its breath since I was 9 years old finally let go. I stood up, lighter by an entire childhood, and opened the door. Back at the long table, both attorneys reassembled, the lemon bars sweating untouched in their Tupperware. The retired judge asked if either party had anything to say before continuing the private caucuses. I said I did. Patricia turned her chair an inch toward me. We'd agreed beforehand that I'd say this next part myself on the record in my own voice. There is no partnership. There never was one. Everyone at this table has known that since breakfast, I said. So here is my answer to every offer made or implied. I will not be paying the note. I will not be signing a confidentiality agreement. This afternoon, my attorney is delivering my sworn affidavit of forgery to the bank, along with the handwriting examiner's report and my alibi records. And the complaint regarding the false notarization goes to the state this week. Their attorneys started to speak. I wasn't finished, and we're withdrawing our counterclaim for damages. I don't want their money. I don't want the store, the house, or 1 acre of what's left. I want my name out of their books. That's genuinely all I've ever wanted. I just spent 30 years calling it something else. The room went quiet enough that I could actually hear the lemon bars settling in their container. My mother stood up, And for the first time in my entire life, I watched her composure fail in public. Watched the register counting stillness crack straight down the middle, and what came through the crack wasn't rage. It was disbelief. She had made me the one offer she genuinely believed no starving person could refuse, and I had refused it anyway, and her entire arithmetic of the world hinged on that being impossible. "You'd hand your own mother to the state," she said, her voice catching on itself, "over paperwork." I gathered my folder and squared it neatly to the table edge, out of habit. "You notarized it, Mom," I said. "Paper is where you put me. It's the only place you ever put me." I picked up my coat and said the last thing I would ever say to my mother's face, and I said it gently, because it was surrender, mine and hers both. "You don't have to be proud of me now. You just have to be careful of me. I finally know the difference." She said my name once, quietly, like a door easing shut. I signed the affidavit in Patricia's car, afterward with the windows down. My hand didn't shake at all. Paperwork slowly, and then all at once. Within 3 weeks, the bank's fraud counsel reviewed my affidavit, the examiner's report, and their own file, and did exactly what Patricia had predicted banks do with forged paper. They cut it loose. My guarantee was formally rescinded, the bank preferring one bad loan on the books to a public trial over how a branch had accepted a seal without ever confirming a signer. The lawsuit died even faster. Their attorney, having seen the logbook with his own eyes, withdrew from representing them within the week, and the case was dismissed with prejudice before the holidays, with prejudice meaning forever, meaning they could never bring it again. I had Patricia repeat that phrase to me twice, slowly, like a favorite song. The state's process moved on its own clock. In time, my mother voluntarily surrendered her notary commission ahead of formal revocation, and she and Renee entered into a diversion agreement. Restitution to the bank, a formal admission of the false notarization on the record, no trial. First offense, her age, full repayment. The state wanted its own integrity restored more than it wanted two women sitting in a courtroom. Some of you will find that too soft. I understand. But I'd asked the prosecutor's office for exactly nothing harsher than that, and here's why. The sentence that actually mattered had already been served, in a small cold room, in the silence that followed my one honest question. The only thing left after that was the parking lot. Renee caught me beside Patricia's car, out of scripts at last, her mascara actually running. "You could have saved us," she said. "You had the money. You could have just saved us." I looked at my sister, 36 years old, magnificent, ruined, still holding a legal pad she'd never once written on, and gave her the truest thing I had left. "Noren, I could have paid for you. That's not the same thing at all. Nobody ever taught either of us the difference." For 1 second, something crossed her face that might, in different soil, have eventually grown into understanding. Then my mother called her name from across the lot, and she went. The bill came due through that winter, and I want to be honest about the cost, because that's the part revenge stories always leave out. My legal fees topped $50,000, unrecoverable, simply gone. The Millhaven rumor mill assigned me my permanent title, the girl who turned in her own mother. 2 more clients drifted off quietly, citing nothing at all. My aunt still calls, but only on Tuesdays now when her husband bowls, and I notice the careful scheduling and say nothing, because you learn to take love in whatever size it actually comes. One gray afternoon in January, my father called, the first phone call of his entire life, as far as I know, placed from the store's back room with the compressor running for cover. He didn't say hello. "Your grandmother would have done exactly the same thing you did," he said. "She'd have done it faster." A long breath, the compressor humming behind him. "Don't tell your mother I said that." Click. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone for a long while after that. The house on Sycamore went up for sale that spring. The bank's restructured note and Renee's remaining vendor debts got settled the only way left available, and my parents moved into a small 2-bedroom rental near the church. I learned about it from Priya, and I sat with the news for a long time, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I felt, because I promised you honest grief. Yes, some. And underneath it, a terrible, clean quiet, like a ledger finally closed by someone else's hand. The machine had eaten its own machinists in the end. It never needed me for that part. It never had. That April, an envelope arrived from the Secretary of State's office. Millhaven Holdings, LLC, Amended filing, membership updated, my name released, removed, gone. A dozen years of paperwork ended in a single line. I read it on my porch, and it weighed absolutely nothing at all. 6 months later, a gray sedan idled at the end of the sandy lane leading to my house. A Sunday in October, 5 years and 7 months since the night of that cashier's check. I was out on the porch with my coffee, going through payroll. Some women take up watercolors. I took up this. The sedan crept down the lane slow, the way cars move when the driver is squinting at house numbers, and stopped at my gate. My mother behind the wheel. Renee in the passenger seat. 3 hours, uninvited, unannounced, to talk, I imagine, or maybe just to see it for themselves. The way you drive past a thing to finally make it real. I didn't move. The gate stayed closed. It's a low, simple gate, and its whole job that day was just to stand there being mine. What happened next, I watched through my own screen door, and Priya later confirmed the family's version, word for word, because Renee told it herself, crying at our aunt's kitchen table. My sister got out of the car and stood in the sandy lane in that October light, looking at the house, the gray cedar shakes, the proud straight roof line, the storm shutters I'd hung with my own hands, the garden coming up along the rock border, and my sister, who had once held $1 million in her 2 hands at a dinner table while a whole family applauded, simply came apart in the road like bad weather. She screamed it at my mother, loud enough that I heard every word clear over the surf. Why does she get everything? It was supposed to be me. And my mother sat behind the wheel with both hands at 10 and 2, staring straight ahead at my house like a woman doing one final piece of inventory and finding at last that the count simply would not come out right. Here's what I understood, standing there at my own screen door with my coffee going cold. That scream wasn't actually for me. Neither of them was seeing me at all, even now. Renee was screaming at the machine itself. And sitting at the wheel of that machine was its very first victim, still driving it, all these years later. I stepped back from the door and let the tide have the rest of it. The sedan sat there another minute, then backed out of my lane, and that was the last time my family ever came to where I live. Life afterward insisted on being ordinary, which, it turns out, is the entire prize. Ren made office manager at 21 and cried at the title on her new business cards, and I pretended not to notice, per our unspoken treaty. The firm sits at just under 60 clients now, and a waiting list I guard like a garden fence. Big enough to matter, small enough that I still sleep. Walt threw a fish fry down at the marina for my 5th business anniversary, stood up on an overturned cooler, and told the whole dock that I'd once fought the government with nothing but a calculator and won, a story that gets less accurate and somehow more beloved every single year he tells it. Priya brings her kids down every summer now. Her youngest calls my place the Ant Beach. And in the evenings, I work the garden I built myself along the rock border behind the house, where the county map insists nothing can grow. I hauled the soil in bag by bag, 2 whole summers of it, bedded into the seams of the limestone with compost and pure stubbornness. There's sea lavender out there now, and beach sunflowers, and one absurd tomato plant that Walt mocks relentlessly and eats from anyway. My grandmother would have understood all of it on sight. My mother once told me you don't water rocks. And after a great deal of study, I've decided she was almost right. Turns out you can water rocks. You just have to bring your own dirt. Some nights I sit out there with coffee gone cold, the gulls arguing over the tittle-line, and I take stock, assets, liabilities, the whole honest column. And the number that comes back is one my mother's arithmetic never had a line for. Enough. It adds up to enough. Nobody handed it to me. Nobody can call it due. And nobody ever gets to appraise it off my shelf again. Page 1 said grow anyway. Consider it grown. If there's one thing I'd carve above every kitchen table in this country, it's this: your worth was never the number somebody else wrote next to your name, because people who make you buy their love are always selling something broken. The moment you stop renting space in someone else's ledger and start keeping your own books, on your own dirt, you find out the accounting was wrong the entire time. You were never the rock in their garden. You were the seed they refused to water. And seeds keep. Seeds wait. Seeds grow anyway.